The planet is on a healing path from coronavirus. Vaccination against COVID-19 has begun around the world. The best virologists promise to bring people back to normal reality. What's happening now in different countries? Where quarantine has become a way of life? When can we breathe again without masks? All this in the Stop COVID program. Almost 2 billion doses of vaccines have already been used around the world. In countries with high per capita incomes, 1 in 4 receive the vaccine, while only 1 in 400 receive the vaccine in poor countries. Discrimination among countries over vaccinations, which everyone tried so hard to avoid at the beginning of the pandemic, still exists. Until now, there are places on the planet where they are just waiting for the start of vaccine supplies. While in countries like Israel and Great Britain, they are already talking about the formed herd immunity. More than 70% of the population were vaccinated there. The number of infections has dropped. Restrictive measures are being relaxed every day. Surprisingly, there are countries where the coronavirus simply ceased to exist, even without vaccination. In Tajikistan, according to official data, not a single new case of infection has been registered. In the past, out of 9.5 million Tajik citizens, only 13,000 people suffered from COVID-19. 90 cases of disease ended in death. Independent sources claim that the statistics are far from reality. Life is in full swing on the main square of the central market of the city of Huzhang. There have always been a lot of people here. Nothing has changed with the advent of COVID-19. The distance between buyers and sellers has not increased. Only occasionally a mass can be seen in the crowd. While all over the world, one country after another announces lockdowns, Tajikistan has almost forgotten about the existence of the new deadly disease. Over the past year, the borders have never been closed here. A lockdown has not been announced. Children and teenagers haven't been transferred to online education. There simply were no capacities in the country. Not all homes have the internet or even computers. Tajikistan turned out to be unprepared for a new secure life format due to the lack of technological development. It was also impossible to close the population inside their own state. Until then, labor migration fed half of the country. However, it still had to adapt to new realities. Despite perfect statistics, Russia closed the borders for Tajik citizens. It turned out that there is a gold mine in their own country, and it's literally gold. A real fever began in Tajikistan last year. Former labor migrants flocked to the north of the country to pan for precious metals in local rivers. In addition to gold, sometimes they come across precious stones. Here they have a specially devised equipment. All this happens quite legally. The authorities issue licenses for gold mining. I used to go to Russia. I was a Russian labor migrant. Now I work here and mine gold. I studied specifically for it and have all the documents. I earn good money here. I also invite young people. The length of the river is 400 kilometers. If we calculate both shores, it will already be 800 kilometers. No matter how much we wash out the gold, we won't be able to cope with everything. Much goes downstream to Samarkand, Uzbekistan. To survive and find money for food, one doesn't have to go to the mountains for gold. In Tajikistan, they began to issue interest-free loans for the development of small businesses. Returning labor migrants will be the first one to receive state money. The amounts are small, from 3 to 10,000 samoni. It's about $350 to $900. The funds must be returned after a year. In May last year, Tajikistan received an interest-free loan from IMF, almost $190 million. Then the country's authorities said that this money is needed to cover social needs and help the victims of COVID-19. Another $3 million were irrevocably allocated by the World Bank. The most needy families were given 500 samoni, which is about 20,000 tenge. In 2021, labor migrants who returned from the Russian Federation contacted our service. They can return money either once a month or every quarter. In a year, they must pay off the debt in full. course, not only men left to work in Russia, women who were among labor migrants turned out to be financially vulnerable too. Zarina is a housewife. She opened a small workshop in her apartment and now receives orders for sewing national mattresses, dresses for brides, men's dressing gowns, and knitted products. The state loan was enough for an old, still Soviet-era sewing machine and fabric. Then things went on. Zarina started her own small but profitable business. My husband and I returned from Russia last year. I turned to the employment center. I was given an interest-free loan in the amount of 3,000 samoni. I bought a sewing machine and fabric to get started. Now I'm receiving orders. Masks and sanitizers are a thing of the past in Tajikistan. According to official statistics, the country has been free of coronavirus for 4 months. But cases of pneumonia have become more frequent in the country. As you know, this is the main manifestation of COVID-19. Despite this, mass vaccination has begun in the country. So far, a vaccine produced in India is used. There are plans to approve the Russian and Chinese vaccines. The vaccine against COVID-19 was also delivered to our country, 192,000 vaccines. According to the decree of the Ministry of Health, we are now working on a plan to start immunization in the north of Tajikistan. Our plan consists of stages that we must go through. In the first stage, medical workers, residents who are over 60, people who suffer from diabetes, high blood pressure, AIDS, patients with heart condition, and cancer will be vaccinated. The second stage is aimed at people aged 50 to 59, education and science workers mainly. The third stage will include people from 18 to 40 years old. It won't be so easy to vaccinate the population of Tajikistan. Many men forbid their children to have even basic vaccines. They are sure that this is a harm imposed by developed countries. Now, in order to radically change the situation and public opinion, authorities have engaged local mosques in the propaganda of vaccinations. Imams now, along with doctors and officials, urge the population not to refuse immunization. In April, Russia reopened its borders to Tajikistan. Perhaps now gold mining and small business development will decline there again. Citizens of Tajikistan still cannot fly in other directions. Governments of many developed countries, such as the United States, have compiled lists of states where they strongly recommended their citizens not to fly. This list includes up to 80% of the entire world, including countries such as Russia, Mozambique, Kenya, Brazil, Argentina, and countries of Central Asia. Another state that is almost on top of that list is South Africa. All over the world, it became famous for a new mutation of the coronavirus, which is much more difficult to defeat than others. Even a number of vaccines cannot protect against infection with the South African strain. The families here are just huge. There are 5 kids here next to me, 3 more ran out there. We have already counted 8 children. Their mother is a woman who lives in that house. South Africa, which frightens at the moment the entire world, and the real South Africa are like 2 different countries. While official figures say that there are about 1.5 million infections, local residents say Hakuna Matata, which means life without worries. Restrictions are imposed only in the large cities of Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. But against the general background of other countries, quarantine measures here seem quite loyal and soft. The country is in no hurry to introduce COVID restrictions because there were already enough of them, and there is a big chasm in profits, which is why the government says so. If we often introduce lockdown rules, then we will be in such a strong decline and loss that the population simply won't stand it. Therefore, here lockdowns are introduced only on holidays. The last lockdown was on Easter holiday. It was done in order to avoid crowds of people on vacations on the beach, but it's already finished.
На отдыхе, на пляже, на каких-то спот-пикниках. но он уже закончен. Также есть правила, которые ограничивают.
There is also a rule that restricts the sale of alcoholic beverages. This is not surprising because South Africa is famous for its wines, and the local population loves to drink. From Thursday to Monday, the sale of alcoholic beverages in certain stores, supermarkets is discontinued to relieve the burden on hospitals and not to occupy beds for nothing, to leave them for patients with COVID.
Для больных ковидом.
Residents mainly from the most disadvantaged areas called townships drink heavily and then get into fights. Illegals and the poorest people in the country live in the containers and spontaneous dwellings without any conditions. The largest outbreaks of infections are also recorded here. In the villages of South Africa, no one wears masks, there are no sanitizers. Not everyone can even read. Due to the fact that the local population cannot read, they often draw. If this is food, then it's some kind of food. Why tourists are still greeted with caution? They can bring a new disease to the locals and they already have enough worries. In order to prevent lice, heads of all children, including girls, are shaved, and scabies and a number of other exclusively African misfortunes are also common.
Надо сказать, что с приходом коронавируса в
I must say that as soon as coronavirus appeared in South Africa, tourism has dropped dramatically. Just recently, we returned from our 3-week trip, and there are no foreign tourists in the hotels. There are only locals who leave only for the weekend. This is surprising for South Africa because South Africa is a tourist country. There is a lot to see, and some hotels had to close. The restaurants didn't even open. That is, South Africa experiences big losses in terms of tourism.
статье туризма тут ЮАР несет большие убытки. Но тем не менее путешествия.
But nevertheless, traveling around the country is possible, and now is a good time to explore it because house prices have dropped. Many hotels are bargaining on site. Although they don't really offer discounts online, you just need to come to the reception and ask for the Corona price, and you will immediately get 30% off on accommodation.
Где-то на 30% точно жилье.
Меня зовут Максим, я сейчас...
My name is Maxim. I'm in South Africa. I came here as a tourist 5 months ago. Initially, I had a visa for 3 months, but then due to the coronavirus, the visa was extended for all tourists in South Africa, and they extended again and again with each iteration.
Еще с каждой итерацией снова.
Maxim and his wife have already visited more than 50 countries. The man works remotely from anywhere in the world, so he prefers to change his locations regularly. Only now these movements take much more time and money compared to before COVID era. Now the country has a vaccination program, but only the local population is vaccinated. Tourists and those living here illegally won't be vaccinated here no matter how much money they are willing to give. If you compare it with the Emirates, then in the Emirates you can get vaccinated while being on vacation. The vaccination program has now been temporarily suspended. First, a batch of the British-Swedish vaccine was purchased by South Africa. Then it turned out that the drug was absolutely powerless against the South African strain. The country sold all the doses to its neighbors. Then they began to vaccinate their population with a one-stage American vaccine, but it turned out that it has a side effect, a rare fatal thrombosis. The use of this drug has also been cancelled. Now the country's authorities are looking for a more suitable vaccine manufacturer. The restrictions are gradually being lifted and relaxed on the European continent. Last year, Italy was the first to fall ill here. 40,000 cases of new infections were recorded per day. Before countries began to close their borders, Italians were feared and avoided. It was Italy that first introduced the strictest quarantine, which people observe up to the present day. Only now the light at the end of the tunnel appeared. The government announced the day when the country would once again open its doors to tourists. It's one of the most recognizable and unique cities on the planet. Incredibly romantic and the most visited city of Italy, Venice used to receive up to 30 million tourists a year. Now there is a deafening silence here. It's unusual to look at deserted streets. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasia and I'm a guide in Venice.
Сейчас мы находимся в зоне возле...
We are in the area of St. Mark's Square. Look how calm, quiet and empty it is now. Before the pandemic, it was the most crowded street. This part of the city really looks like a ghost town.
Это была самая наполненная людьми улица. В этой части город действительно напоминает город-призрак.
Almost 4 million Italians out of 60 have had coronavirus. The main load fell on the north of the country. To avoid the appearance of other foci of COVID-19, for a year now, it's forbidden to move even between regions. Venice, on the other hand, suffered much more, not from the COVID itself, but from its consequences. Venice is going through a very difficult period of the pandemic because most of their local income comes from the tourism business. Therefore, compared to other Italian cities, Venice is in a particularly difficult situation. Italy ranks fourth in the world in terms of income from tourism. A huge part of the population relies on this industry. There are even special professions in Venice, such as gondoliers. Once they were one of the highest paid workers here. Now there is no one to take on a ride down the canals.
Все, что связано в Венеции.
Everything related to tourism in Venice, of course, is now suffering. Gondoliers are no exception. They have very few tourists and have dropped their standard prices a lot.
Снизили стандартные цены. На сегодняшний день ограничитель.
To date, restrictive measures are being relaxed. The Veneto region and its capital Venice is moving towards the yellow zone. We're now in orange zone. In the yellow zone, bars and restaurants will be open not only for takeout, but it will be possible to eat and drink indoors. In any case, hotels, restaurants, shops, and the entire tourist business are actively preparing for the new tourist season in the hope that it will soon start. We're waiting for everyone in Venice.
Нахожусь в самом центре Милана. Как вы можете видеть, достаточно пусто.
I am in the very center of Milan. As you can see, it's quite empty. It has been a year since we haven't seen any tourists here. Locals are also in no hurry to go out on the street because without an official reason, work or health issues, for almost a year, it's not allowed to walk down the streets of Milan.
Необходимость гулять по улице Милана уже год как нельзя.
People didn't fly to any city in the world to do shopping as often as they did to Milan. After all, where else is there such a concentration of high-end brand boutiques, terraces with cool prosecco and style? Now the lifestyle is completely different. Walks on the balcony, the police, and endless restrictions.
Уже год как Италия в локдауне, причем большую часть года это в жестком локдауне.
For a year now, Italy has been under lockdown and for the most part of the year under strict lockdown, when it wasn't even allowed to leave the house. In general, even now, you're allowed to leave the house only for certain reason. For example, the reason may be due to health, you need to go to the hospital, or because of work or some kind of urgent necessity. For example, I had to go to the bank, so I'm coming from the bank. And I had to fill out a certificate at home, a certain paper, write where I was going, indicate my number, the reason why I'm going, and where I'm registered. And if the policeman stopped me, I would have to show them this paper, and they could call on the phone and ask if in fact such a lady is coming to that place.
Предъявить эту бумагу, и они могут позвонить по этому телефону и спросить, на самом ли деле такая сеньора едет к вам, вы ее ждете ли?
Since the country plunged into lockdown, Italian small business owners have twice received 600 euros in benefits. Workers received monthly payments which gradually got smaller and smaller. While kindergartens were closed in the country, the government allocated nanny allowances to families with children so that parents could go to work. Also about 600 euros per month. But still, the authorities were much more generous with their fines. A fine for not wearing a mask or if it's not covering your nose, and for not observing the distance is 400 euros. I remember that a week and a half ago, mothers who walked their children were fined almost on the playground. There's simply no one else to fine, apparently. They were with the children on the playground. They were fined because they didn't keep their distance. Such draconian measures were introduced in the country due to horrific statistics. Last spring, the coronavirus became the second disease after cancer in terms of the number of deaths. Only 75% of high school students are allowed to attend classes, and family doctors often switch to the telemedicine format. This is when consultations are provided over the phone and not in person. From time to time, discontent is heard from the empty streets, but at the end of this month, it was promised that people will be allowed to travel between cities and the summer cafe terraces will be open. Italy will welcome tourists on June 2nd. In the meantime, the country is going through an active vaccination campaign. Nearly 5 million people have already been vaccinated.